What if I told you the most chaotic, most scandalous, most financially catastrophic concert tour in American music history? A tour so messy it literally changed who owns an NFL team, was cleaned up, sanitized, and served to 300 million moviegoers as a feel-good father-son drama. Sony spent $150 million to make sure you felt the victory tour. They just didn't want you to know the victory tour.
How are you, everyone? Welcome back to MJ Fan TV, your number one destination for the latest Michael Jackson news, biopic updates, box office milestones, fan reactions, and everything about the King of Pop. If you love Michael Jackson and want daily updates on his music, legacy, and upcoming projects, you're in the right place. Before we start, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to MJ Fan TV, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any update. Now let's dive into today's Michael Jackson news.
If you've seen the Michael Jackson biopic Michael, which by the way has already pulled in over $227 million at the global box office, you know the movie is a spectacle. Jaffer Jackson absolutely transforms into his uncle. The performances are stunning. The cinematography, gorgeous. And yeah, I got chills during the victory tour sequence. I'll admit that. But here's the thing about a $150 million movie, produced with the full blessing of the Michael Jackson estate and Sony Pictures. When the estate signs off on your film, they're not just giving you access to the music. They're giving you the power to shape the narrative. And the narrative they chose? It's compelling. It's emotional. It makes you root for Michael against his father, Joe. It gives you that satisfying moment where Michael grabs the mic and announces on stage, in front of thousands of screaming fans, that the tour is over. That he's free. It's a great scene. The problem? The real story is exponentially more insane, more complicated, and more devastating than anything you saw on that screen. Today, we are going all the way in. We're talking about the backroom deals, the ticket lottery disaster, the promoter who bet an NFL franchise and lost, the boxing promoter who nobody wanted involved, the financial spiral that left one of America's most storied sports teams on the chopping block. And we're going to ask the question that's been bothering fans and film critics alike since the movie dropped. Why did Sony, the estate, and director Antoine Fuqua leave the most explosive parts of this story on the cutting room floor? Buckle up, because this story is wild. Let's set the scene. It's 1984. Michael Jackson is, without exaggeration, the most famous human being on planet Earth. Thriller, the best-selling album of all time, has been out for 2 years. He has just performed Billie Jean on Motown 25. Yesterday, today, and forever. The moonwalk has broken the internet before the internet existed. Michael is untouchable. And that's exactly the problem, at least for the people around him who wanted a piece of that success. Joe Jackson, Michael's father, his manager, his complicated antagonist, could see the writing on the wall. Michael was pulling away. He had his own management. He had Frank Dilio. He had lawyers and accountants who answered to him, not the family. The solo career was a rocket ship, and the family was standing on the launch pad watching it disappear into orbit. So Joe hatched a plan. If Michael wouldn't come to the family, he'd manufacture a reason for the family to come to Michael. Enter the Victory album. The Jacksons released Victory in 1984. It featured Michael, but barely. He co-wrote 2 tracks with Mick Jagger and appeared on others, but make no mistake, this was not an album he poured his heart into. The critics noticed. Rolling Stone called it exactly what you'd expect from a group trying to capitalize on one member's incredible solo success. But an album means a tour, and a tour means money. And with Michael Jackson's name above the marquee, this tour was going to make everybody rich. At least that was the plan. Joe Jackson then made what might be the single worst business decision of the entire saga. He brought in Don King to promote the tour. Yes, that Don King. The boxing promoter, the guy with the electric hair and the American flag pins, the man who had spent decades representing some of the greatest fighters in the world and had a reputation for negotiating contracts that somehow always seemed to benefit one party over everyone else. Michael hated the idea from the start. Now, in the biopic, we see Michael's discomfort. We see the tension. But the film moves past it fairly quickly, framing it mostly as a father-son conflict. In reality, Michael's opposition to Don King was fierce, documented, and completely justified. Michael had seen what King had done to fighters. He had heard the stories, and he wanted absolutely nothing to do with a man he considered a manipulator operating in bad faith. But he felt trapped. His brothers needed this. The family needed this. And walking away from the victory tour would mean publicly declaring war on his own flesh and blood. So he showed up. He just made sure he wasn't going to be alone in the room with King for long. Michael's manager Frank Dilio moved fast. He couldn't get Don King fully removed. King had contracts, he had Joe Jackson's backing, and removing him entirely would have caused a legal war. But Dilio could sideline him. The solution? Bring in a new lead promoter. Someone who could run the actual logistics of the tour, while King held onto his title, but diminishing power. That someone was Chuck Sullivan. Now, if you don't follow NFL history, the Sullivan name might not mean much to you. But in New England, in the world of professional football, the Sullivans were royalty. Billy Sullivan founded the New England Patriots. His family had owned the franchise since its inception. They owned Sullivan Stadium, the team's home field. They owned a racing track. They were, by any reasonable measure, a wealthy and established family with deep roots in American sports. Chuck Sullivan was Billy's son. And Chuck, confident, ambitious, maybe a little overconfident, agreed to become the lead promoter for the Victory Tour. Here's where it gets absolutely incredible. To finance his role as promoter, to back the infrastructure, the staging, the logistics, Chuck Sullivan took out a $12.5 million loan from Crocker Bank. And as collateral, he put up the New England Patriots, Sullivan Stadium, and the family's racetrack. Read that again. The man literally bet an NFL franchise on a Michael Jackson concert tour. Now, at first glance, this doesn't sound insane. This is Michael Jackson, post-Thriller, the most famous person alive. Of course the tour would be profitable. Of course the tickets would sell. Of course this was a safe bet. Except for one small problem. The terms of the deal were an absolute disaster. According to a detailed Los Angeles Times investigation from January 1985, the original contract structure gave King and the Jacksons a combined 83.44% of concert proceeds. Chuck Sullivan, he got 16.56%, 16.5%. And out of that 16.56%, he was required to pay virtually every operational cost of the tour. The staging, the crew, the venues, the production, everything. Oh, and there was another clause buried in the contract. Sullivan was required to pay $21 for every ticket, whether or not that ticket was actually sold. Let me let that sink in. Whether the ticket sold or not. Every unsold seat in every arena across America was costing Chuck Sullivan money directly out of his pocket. By the time the first 3 months of the tour had passed, the Los Angeles Times reported that at least 30,000 tickets had gone unsold, costing Sullivan over $500,000 just from that one clause alone. And that's before we even get to the operational chaos. Michael Jackson doesn't do anything small. His creative vision is, and I say this with full reverence, completely untethered from practical financial considerations. For the Victory Tour, Michael insisted on a production that was unprecedented in scale. We're talking about an 8-story stage structure that had to be assembled and disassembled at every venue. 8 stories. Tall. This thing was a monster. It was breathtaking. It was exactly the kind of spectacle that a performer of Michael Jackson's stature deserves to perform in front of. There was just one catastrophic side effect. It made enormous chunks of every arena completely unusable. Think about how stadiums are laid out. You have the floor. You have the lower bowl. You have the upper deck. At a normal concert, all of that real estate generates ticket revenue. But when you have a stage the size of a small office building planted in the middle of your venue, it creates blind spots. It blocks sight lines. Entire sections of seats had to be left off the market because no one sitting in them could actually see the show. For Chuck Sullivan, who was paying for unsold tickets regardless of whether they could physically be occupied, this was an unmitigated financial catastrophe. Every venue, every night, money bleeding out. Now here's the part of the Victory Tour story that genuinely infuriated American music fans in 1984. And it's the part that the biopic glosses over almost entirely. The ticket structure for this tour was, look, I'll just describe it to you, and you tell me if this sounds like something designed for the fans. Tickets were $30 each. Not bad, right? Adjusted for inflation, that's about $95 today. Reasonable for the biggest concert tour in history. But here's the twist. You couldn't buy one ticket. You had to buy 4. That's $120 minimum per transaction in 1984 dollars, which is roughly $381 today. But wait, it gets worse. You couldn't walk up to a Ticketmaster window and buy these tickets. You couldn't call a hotline. The only way to get tickets to the Victory Tour was to mail in your payment, physical check or money order, in an envelope, to a P.O. box. And here's the kicker. The one that genuinely made national news, that had fans screaming at their televisions. Sending in your $120 didn't get you tickets. It got you entry into a lottery. That's right. The Victory Tour was running a concert ticket lottery. You'd send in your money, and then a random draw would determine whether you actually got in. If you won the lottery, you'd receive tickets, but you wouldn't know in advance where your seats were. You could get front row. You could get the nosebleeds. Total mystery. No choice. If you lost the lottery, you eventually got your money back. Eventually. The backlash was swift and ferocious. Consumer advocates were furious. Parents who had promised their kids a Michael Jackson concert were outraged. The press had a field day. And Michael Jackson, who, remember, hadn't designed this ticketing system, hadn't wanted this tour in the first place, and was watching his spotless public image take hits on the evening news, decided he needed to act. He called a press conference. He looked into the cameras, and he announced that every penny he personally earned from the Victory Tour would be donated to charity. 3 organizations, the United Negro College Fund, Camp Good Times for Children with Cancer, and the T.J. Martell Foundation for Leukemia and Cancer Research. It was a masterclass in reputation management and genuine generosity simultaneously. Michael was legitimately upset about the exploitation of his fan base. He genuinely wanted to distance himself from the optics of corporate greed. And he had the means and the willingness to do something about it. The announcement didn't fix the logistics. It didn't make the lottery go away. But it reframed the story from Michael Jackson gouges fans to Michael Jackson gives everything to charity. The biopic shows none of this. None of the lottery chaos. None of the fan outrage. None of the press conference. Just the emotional beat of Michael not wanting to do the tour. And then the triumphant moment of him ending it. The inconvenient, messy human story, edited out. By the time the Victory Tour ended in December 1984, the financial damage was catastrophic. Sullivan had renegotiated some of his contract terms mid-tour. He wasn't completely helpless, and Dilio's people did work to make some adjustments. But the cost had already ballooned past any reasonable recovery point. The final tally? Best estimates suggest Chuck Sullivan and his family lost approximately $20 million on the Victory Tour. $20 million. Gone. For context, the New England Patriots, one of the most storied franchises in NFL history, future winners of 6 Super Bowls, had been acquired by Billy Sullivan in 1960 for less than $30,000. The franchise that had been in the Sullivan family for nearly 3 decades was now at risk because of a concert tour. The dominoes fell exactly as you'd expect. The Sullivan family, drowning in debt, put the team up for sale. In 1988, the Patriots were sold to Victor Kiam. Yes, the razor commercial guy. And the stadium itself was eventually acquired through bankruptcy court by Robert Kraft. Robert Kraft, the man who would go on to turn the Patriots into a dynasty. The man who hired Bill Belichick. The man who sat in the owner's box for 6 Super Bowl victories. Robert Kraft owns the New England Patriots in part because Michael Jackson's concert tour bankrupted the previous owners. That sentence sounds like a Wikipedia vandalism prank. It is 100% historically documented. And the biopic? The movie that had every resource in the world to tell this story? It mentions the tour. It shows Michael on stage. It gives you the dramatic father-son confrontation. It does not mention Chuck Sullivan. It does not mention the $12.5 million loan. It does not mention the Patriots. It does not mention Robert Kraft. Why not? I'll give you my theory in a minute. First, let's talk about Don King's actual fate in all of this. Don King in the biopic is portrayed as a presence, an obstacle, but one that Michael overcomes. He's part of the system Michael escapes from. His role in the actual mechanics of the tour's financial disaster is largely brushed past. In reality, King's contract gave him an enormous cut of the proceeds, while Sullivan bore the operational risk. King made money on this tour. Sullivan lost money. The Jacksons made money. Sullivan lost money. The structure was designed, whether intentionally or not, to funnel profit upward while pushing liability downward onto the guy with the least leverage and the most collateral on the table. Now, I'm not here to make legal arguments about what happened. The courts processed all of this in the mid to late 1980s, and the Sullivan family sought damages. But the core story is pretty clear. Chuck Sullivan walked into a deal where the risk was never proportional to the reward, and he paid for it with his family's legacy. The fact that this story doesn't make it into a $150 million biopic about the man at the center of the whole situation is telling. Okay, this is the part where we get real. The Michael Jackson biopic was produced with the full cooperation and active involvement of the Michael Jackson estate. John Branca and John McClane, the co-executors of the estate, were producers on the film. Let me explain what that means in practical terms. It means the estate had creative input. It means they had approval rights. It means the movie you saw was, to some degree, the movie they wanted you to see. Now, is that inherently sinister? Not necessarily. Every biopic gets shaped by its subjects, families, and rights holders. Bohemian Rhapsody was shaped by Queen's surviving members. Rocketman was shaped by Elton John himself. Walk the Line was shaped by the Cash family. But here's the distinction that matters. The Victory Tour isn't just a personal story. It has third-party victims. The Sullivan family. The fans who got ripped off by the lottery. The promoters who got squeezed. These are real people with real stories, and their stories are part of the Victory Tour. Telling the Victory Tour story accurately means telling a story where Michael Jackson's name, brand, and tour, even if Michael himself didn't personally design the predatory ticket structure, caused genuine harm to fans, and contributed to financial devastation for a real family. That's an uncomfortable story for an estate trying to rehabilitate and celebrate a legacy. Sony, for their part, was never going to fight the estate on this. They need the music rights. They need the cooperation. They need Jaffer Jackson on screen, looking and moving exactly like his uncle. Without the estate, there's no biopic. So the calculus is simple. You tell the story the estate is comfortable with, or you don't get to tell the story at all. The result is a Victory Tour sequence that is visually spectacular, emotionally resonant, and historically incomplete. And that incompleteness matters. Not because we want to tear Michael Jackson down. The man was a generational genius, full stop. But because the real story is actually more interesting than the sanitized version, here's the thing that gets lost in the sanitization. The real Victory Tour story is not a story about Michael Jackson being a bad guy. It's